Hey, what's going on everybody? Zach Long here, Doctor of Physical Therapy, to talk about the two best stretches to do if you're dealing with hip pinching during your squats. This is something that I very commonly treat, especially with CrossFitters, powerlifters, and Olympic lifters. So these two stretches will help a lot of individuals out. The first one's actually not even a hip stretch. It's going to be an ankle stretch. And the reason for that is a lot of individuals who go through a lot of hip motion as they squat and don't get their knees pushed forward very much end up getting pinchy in the front side of their hips. So if we can shift them from being a little bit more hip dominant in their squat to getting those knees forward, you can see how that decreases the amount of hip motion that I actually have to go through in the bottom of my squat. So the way we're going to do this stretch is we're going to grab a kettlebell or a dumbbell, rest our forearms right above our knees, and then drop down into a squat and let that kettlebell pull the knees forward so that we're actually stretching the ankles to improve a little bit of ankle dorsiflexion mobility, and we're working on keeping a little bit more of an upright torso in the bottom of a squat. The second stretch is really good to actually get after the hip and stretch the posterior capsule hip, the back side of the hip. You've probably done the pigeon stretch already if you're dealing with hip impingement. This is going to be different and a little bit more effective for you. So the way we set this stretch up is we get down on our hands and knees. Let's say that my right leg is the leg that's dealing with some hip impingement symptoms. I'm going to kick my left leg back so that I have most of my weight going through my right knee. Then I'm going to rotate my right foot in and then shift my hips towards the right side. And so right there, I'm starting to feel a little bit of tension in the back side of my hip, but I'm really going to turn that up by sitting back. And as I sit back, you'll see I won't have to go very far to feel a big stretch in the back side of my hip, and that's really deep, deeper than you'll typically feel something like the pigeon stretch. And we'll just hang out there for a minute or two, stretching the back side of that hip capsule. Now, with that stretch, you can play around with a couple different things. You can play around with how much rotation you use, how much side bending you use, and how much you go into hip flexion to really get that good backside stretch. What I don't want to happen is for you to get deep into hip flexion as you do the stretch. I'd rather you get a little bit more tied up with the rotation and the side glide here, rather than going through hip flexion, because hip flexion, where we bring the knee towards the chest, actually for a lot of people dealing with hip impingement is going to be the position that turns on their symptoms. So we don't want that to happen with this stretch. We just want that big backside stretch. So there are two great stretches to do if you've been dealing with hip impingement or hip pinching during your squats. I hope they give you some relief.